Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hey, welcome along. On tonight's Mark Steyn Show, we talk about the stuff that matters. How about that? Like little girls being gang raped for years on end in towns up and down England. Yesterday, the Home Secretary called that, quote, a stain on our country. That's the least you can say about it. I think I first called it that 6, 7, 8 years ago, but it's nice to hear it from a Minister of the Crown at last. Samantha Smith, a survivor of the depraved hellhole of Telford, will talk about that with us tonight. More stuff that matters. There's plenty of evidence in peer-reviewed journals that the old jabber jabber impacts your menstrual cycle, turns up in your breast milk, weakens your baby's immune system. And here's the important bit. If you're you're a bloke with no interest in what's going on in some gal's lady parts, it can give you a nasty dose of what we used to call in more innocent times brewer's droop. Naomi Wolf is back to talk about failing fertility in our strange new COVID stand. And the stuff that doesn't really matter, but we try to take an interest, the end of the world, as brought about by climate change. The good news is that His Majesty the King won't be going to COP27. The bad news is that somehow, in order to save the planet, you're paying for gender identity classes in Mexico. Alexandra Marshall and Jamie Jenkins are going to talk through various aspects of that. And, of course, the most important part of the show, it's you. Give it your best. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at gbnews. There were a fair amount of people on social media who didn't care for what Naomi was saying yesterday. So tweet me about that, email me about that, and we'll maybe put it to her if we get some interesting points. A full hour of news and analysis coming your way after Polly Middlehurst with the latest headlines. Yesterday, I mistook Polly for Ray. They look very similar in a dark light, but I'm pretty sure that it is actually Polly Middlehurst tonight. So over to you, Polly.
It is indeed me this evening. Thank you, Mark, and good evening to you. Our top story tonight. The Prime Minister at Conservative Party conference in Birmingham has promised to make Britain hard choices to make sure the economy can get growing again. And a warning for those watching on television, the next part of this story does have some flashing imagery. Well, after being heckled by Greenpeace protesters inside the hall, who were quickly ejected from Conservative Party conference, Liz Truss denounced the demonstrators as enemies of enterprise. Party members responded with applause to show their support. She went on to reassure the party but that both she and the Chancellor were in complete lockstep with each other.
I have three priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in three areas.
Well, in news away from politics, a man who caused a gas explosion which killed a toddler in Lancashire has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Darren Greenham used an angle grinder to cut a gas pipe which he planned to sell for scrap metal. He was drunk and under the influence of drugs at the time. 2-year-old George Hines, who lived next door with his family, died in the blast, which happened in May last year. Rail passengers have been facing another day of travel disruption today. ASLEF and TSSA union members are again striking over pay, jobs and conditions, affecting services across the country. The ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the industrial action will continue until the government intervenes. And a boxing match, a fight scheduled to take place between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. could still be set to go ahead, despite being prohibited by the British Boxing Board of Control. The sport's governing body ruled that Saturday's bout was not in the interests of the sport after Mr Benn tested positive for trace amounts of a fertility drug. He's insisting he's a clean athlete and has since passed a test conducted by the UK Anti-Doping Agency. Promoter Matchroom says both boxers have taken legal advice and plan to fight this Saturday. The contest would be the third time the families have fought in the ring, with both their fathers clashing twice in the early 1990s. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. And now it's time for Mark Steyn.
A hurricane is a terrible, murderous thing, but it teaches a very basic lesson. The most advanced society is still a very fragile creation. The story of man is the story of civilization built in a jungle over centuries. Clearings, huts, walls and roofs, then doors and windows, roads and bridges, electricity and air conditioning. And then, as in Florida, the storm sweeps in and in minutes it's all gone. Sanibel Island is one of the loveliest places to live in America, but you can't get to it because the causeway's been destroyed. One moment it was there, the next nothing. Fort Myers Beach was an upscale resort community. Now the majority of homes and businesses are destroyed. Life was good. It's Florida. You bought yourself a nice boat, then the wind blew in from the marina and blew the boat into the middle of the street. 1 minute you're watching Netflix in your luxury condo. The next you're living in a state of nature with your gun close at hand to ward off predators. That's the park in Naples, Florida right now. Hurricane Ian reminds us of a very basic lesson. Civilization is the very thinnest of veneers. It can be swept away in seconds and leave no trace other than random mounds of rubble. Sometimes it's an act of God, as in Florida. Sometimes it's a mysterious explosion. And suddenly, Bornholm, a beautiful, well-ordered Danish community in the Baltic, is sitting in a sea of environmentally devastating toxic methane bubbles. What does that presage? We have had more talk of nuclear attacks in the 7 months of the Ukraine war than in the previous 7 decades. Not so long ago, The mere hint of a suggestion of a nudge and a wink that nuclear deployment was even a possibility would have the media dusting off the old apocalyptic favourites. Albert Einstein, quote, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Yet now, in Washington and Moscow, powerful men game out nuclear scenarios in public and everyone shrugs. I wonder how long that can go on for. Still, at least you know when you've been nuked, you know when the hurricane hits. Elsewhere, civilization is likewise a thin veneer, but it is a persuasive one. Things look more or less the same, even if all the underlying presumptions have been transformed. Freedom of movement? Yeah, sure. Except that if you were minded to visit, say, Florida, to see how your cousin's timeshare is holding up, you will need, as a foreign national, to be fully vaccinated. You have no medical need of that, but it's a requirement for travel. Freedom of speech? Yeah, whatever. Even as you notice that no one quotes that apocryphal bit of Voltaire anymore. I disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Yeah, right. These days it's I disagree with what you say, so I'll get Facebook to label you as misinformation, and if that doesn't work, I'll sick the coppers on you. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. We're going to get into the fraying veneer of civilization in various of its aspects tonight with Naomi Wolf, Alexandra Marshall, Jamie Jenkins, but let's start with those coppers. Yesterday, we interviewed Caroline Farrow, who was arrested, supposedly, for remarks she allegedly made on the internet. She then had her computer seized, was treated as a common criminal, and then tossed in the cells by the totalitarian goons of the Surrey Constabulary. That's the Chief Constable of Surrey that we're looking at for some reason now. And yeah, I'm going by Caroline's version of events because we've tried, but we can't get the other sides. For the second day, we asked that smiley Chief Constable, Gavin Stevens by name, to come on the show to defend this very disturbing arrest. But for a second time, he wiped out, and Surrey Police responded as follows: "We will not be putting Chief Constable Stevens or anyone else up for interview." So that's telling us. Caroline Farrow is a public commentator. She's not as well known as, say, Jeremy Vine or Piers Morgan, but she's appeared on Good Morning Britain and the like. She talks about transgenderism, which is a matter of intense public debate in the United Kingdom. So what's disturbing about Gavin Stevens is that the manner of Caroline Farrow's arrest was a crude and rather obvious attempt to intimidate not only Mrs. Farrow, but anyone else minded to weigh in on this topic. You shouldn't be policing opinion at all, but you certainly shouldn't be policing it by dragging public commentators to the cells and then removing their shoes and jewellery and searching their socks for illegal drugs and weapons. That's what they did to this lady. Oh, but it's just her socks they're searching. Saving her knickers for next time, are you, Chief Constable? Gavin Stevens has put his thumb on the scale of public debate, and that's not something the police are meant to do. But the British Constabulary have taken a side and increasingly act as ideological enforcers. Why do we have an epidemic of child gang rape in Rotherham, Rochdale, Oldham, Oxford, Telford, Banbury, Aylesbury, your town here? Because as in Surrey, the police took a side based on the diktats of diversity, which is increasingly a crude hierarchy that's entirely at odds with equality before the law. So in Guildford, Surrey, it's trans activists versus misgenderers. Therefore, the misgenderers, the baddie, which is why Caroline is apparently looking at 2 years in jail for this pseudo-crime they've accused her of. In all those other jurisdictions, it's gang rapists versus rape victims. That would once have been an easy call in a civilized land. Oh, but wait. The rape victims are almost all poor working-class children, And the rapists are almost all from the Pakistani Muslim community. So the 12-year-old girls are told, tough, you just have to lie back and think of England, because my super says if I kick up a fuss about vibrantly diverse child rapists, I'll be tied up in sensitivity training hell for the next 6 months. So in England, little girls are raped, and that most basic of civilizational veneers, the obligation to protect the most vulnerable, fades to a grey blur. At this week's Tory conference, the new Home Secretary said this.
Dismiss political correctness as a conservative obsession. I say this. I say visit Rochdale. Visit Telford. The grooming gang scandal is a stain on this country, and it's what happens when political correctness becomes more important than criminal justice. More PCs, less PC.
In these islands in 2022, you're lucky if you live in a county where the police are merely crap and useless. If you're unlucky, you live in a county where they're malevolent and complicit. Samantha Smith had the misfortune to grow up in Telford. She was a victim of sexual assault for over a decade, starting at the age of 5. This week she's been at the Tory party conference. There's Samantha. Wearing sensible shoes always helps, and she's back with us today. Great to see you, Samantha. What did you make of the Home Secretary's remarks?
Well, I think that she took a very tough stance on grooming gangs, and particularly the line about less PC, more PCs. I very much enjoyed, but I said it earlier in the week. One of my biggest priorities for Conservative Party conference this year was knowing exactly how they're going to keep their promise to tackle grooming gangs, deport foreign criminals, and take a tough stance on predators and paedophiles rather than on victims and young girls. It's an article released a few days ago by The Mirror, I think highlights the problem of grooming gangs and the lack of action by police forces across the UK. It said that 10,423 grooming gang suspects had been identified by constabularies across England and Wales in the past decade, but just 9.5% of those had ever been charged with any crimes. And that isn't even saying they had faced jail time or been convicted. Those are just people that made it to court. In, for example, Gwent Police, they were the highest, they were the most impressive, they had the most charges when it comes to grooming gang suspects. But even so, 82% of suspects still walked free. There's a massive problem in areas like Telford, Rochdale, Rotherham, Banbury, Oxford, where police forces are simply too scared to actually go through the criminal justice process. I experienced it myself. My case was drawn out for 2 years. I had child psychologists, child psychiatrists assessments before, it could ever be considered by CPS. I went through an immense amount of pain, turmoil, struggle, and a lack of communication from those that were in charge of my case. And in the end, I got a simple email saying,
Oh, I hope we haven't lost Samantha. She was just about to tell us she got an email. She's going to be coming back. Let's just deal with the basic arithmetic on this, Samantha. As you said, something like over 90% of these predators have not been charged. But we should be able to understand the arithmetic. In Telford, they estimate that there were over 1,000 girls were the victims of these rape gangs. And this is basically the same in all these towns. They say, oh, yeah, there were, in Rotherham, the official number is 1,400 victims of these rape gangs, but only a couple of dozen of the rapists ever wind up in court. So the arithmetic makes no sense. We know that in Rotherham and Telford, there are actually hundreds of these child rapists still wandering the streets.
Precisely. It takes no mathematician to figure out that it isn't 12 men, for example, in Telford that are raping over 1,000 girls for 30 plus years. There are countless perpetrators, countless predators, countless paedophiles that are wandering the streets of areas like Telford and completely at ease. They have no fear of being caught because they know that realistically the likelihood that they're going to get charged for their crimes is so low because councils social services, police forces. They turned a blind eye for so long, and they're continuing to be before in your show, but Telford and Wrekin Council still refuse to accept any real responsibility for the part that they played. West Mercia Police have been slightly better. They have admitted that they failed to address grooming gangs in Telford, but many of those in the highest positions of power in places like Telford, Rotherham, Rochdale, continue to benefit from their complicitness and their lack of accountability when it comes to this crime.
Well, we've had astonishing developments. You know, that I think it was West Yorkshire Constabulary. One of the child rapists was actually a constable. In Oldham, one of the guys who organised the rape gang was actually part of the welfare services. Now, we're told that the Labour guys don't want to the Labour Party doesn't want to do anything about this because they regard the Muslim constituency in England as one of their core constituencies, so they don't want to upset them by bringing up any of the child rape or anything. But why do you think, aside from one brief remark, the Conservative Prime Minister, Liz Truss, she doesn't actually talk about this? Why do Conservatives not talk about this a lot?
I think all parties on the left and the right are paralysed by fear when it comes to this topic, and it does come down to political correctness, because you are right that the majority of the victims of this particular type of crime, not child sexual abuse in general, but CSE group-based child sexual exploitation, are white working-class girls, and the majority of the offenders are British Pakistani Muslim men. And so many politicians and party leaders are scared to admit that fact because they don't want to be accused of racism. They don't want to be accused of being far right or extremist or anti-Muslim, when realistically you can't avoid this fact. The demographics are very, very clear, and many studies have proven that fact. And to continue to whitewash and sanitize this topic, to call it, for example, CSE rather than child rape, it only serves to protect the perpetrators, while girls are continuously failed for decades upon decades. You know, girls have been raped, murdered, abused. It's said in the report from the Mirror that 5 child sexual exploitation victims were murdered or took their own lives over a course of 10 years. And yet, where's the justice for those girls? Why are we protecting the rapists, the paedophiles and the predators more than we protect the victims?
No, that's absolutely right. And these useless acronyms like CSE is a way of anaesthetising the population. In the term grooming gang, it is child rape. It's serial child rape for years on end. And then when you go to the police, they're, oh, no, I don't want to get me. It's all a bit politically problematic. We don't want anything to do with this. The little girls should just shut up and continue being raped. And I mentioned the constable and I mentioned the welfare guy in Oldham. We should also remember that in Rotherham, a peer, a member of the House of Lords, one of the Rotherham Muslim community, also has wound up being one of the perpetrators here. I mean, do you think we just need to get totally more honest about how we talk about this, Samantha?
I think that a distinction needs to be drawn between Islamophobia and addressing the issue of child rape, group-based sexual exploitation and child grooming. This isn't an attack on all Muslim people. It isn't an attack on all British Pakistani men. It is a frank addressing of this particular type of crime, the people that perpetrate it, and the reasons why they've been able to get away with it for so long. It isn't racist to want to protect vulnerable little girls from being systematically groomed, raped, abused, and exploited for decades on end. And that's the line that I think needs to be drawn first off, and that's why I do applaud Suella Braverman's speech yesterday, because if we don't talk about these topics, this is why it's been able to be hijacked by certain members of the far right, Tommy Robinson, for example. I know that many people are fans of his work, but in my opinion, personally, I think that pariahs, those people that can be seen by the silent majority, by the moderates as extremists, they have been able to gain such a large platform on issues like CSE because no one else in the mainstream has been willing to talk about it. And that's why I'm so thankful for GB for continuing to highlight this issue, and you especially, Mark.
No, well, but the point about Tommy Robinson is that if all the so-called respectable people, if the nice Labour Party and the nice Liberal Democrats and the nice moderate squishy Tories don't talk about it, the only guy left in England who's going to be talking about it is Tommy Robinson. I mean, he fills the vacuum caused by the silence, and the silence is evil, which is why we do have to keep talking about it. Samantha, I am always amazed by how you have withstood what you had to go through, not just from your tormentors, but from people like West Mercia Police and Telford and Wrekin and Telford, whatever the stupid council is called. They don't even have real names, half these councils. West Mercia isn't a real name. It's Shropshire. It should be Shropshire Police. Who, if it was Shropshire Police, they might be a bit more locally connected and wouldn't be doing it to you. But Samantha, you've been desperately let down by officialdom, and we're always glad to see you surviving and standing strong, and we will watch to see whether the new Home Secretary acts on her words. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to your take on the fraying threads of our civilization. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Naomi Wolf is back with a follow-up on last night's convo, and Alexandra Marshall and Jamie Jenkins are here on His Majesty the King of the Climate and what his ministers are throwing away your money on. Don't touch that dial. We're coming right back.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
GB News is the People's Channel, so let's channel what the people are saying. Canadian guy. That doesn't narrow it down much, does it? Canadian guy says she's just another World Economic Forum. She puppet. She being Liz Truss. Liz Truss is just another. Klaus Schwab is. She's a sock puppet for Klaus Schwab, and he's just wiggling her about. Alison says. Suella said something about grooming gangs, and it's her remit. She didn't have time to mention everything. Howard says Liz Truss hasn't mentioned many subjects. 1, World Economic Forum. 2, grooming gangs. 3, COVID nonsense, etc. All very worrying. And Christopher says, I think Liz Truss is concentrating on economics and immigration. Is she really concentrating on immigration? I'd be interested to see how that pans out. But she did say she would be dealing with it. I think she's farmed this out to a couple of ministers to report on. Would be nice, though, if she updated everyone on what her government is planning. We're going to talk to our stats guy in a minute. But this is like basic arithmetic, as we just to underline the point that Samantha and I were talking about. All these reports are the same. You know, oh, there's over 1,000 girls who've been raped as children in this town, that town, the other town. And what's happened about that? 12 people have gone to jail for a couple of years. OK, well, you do the arithmetic. It's actually hard for even hardcore child rapists to rape this many children. Thousands of them are still wandering around these towns. Last week, we talked to Mark Morano about the Great Reset. And some BBC ninny, was it that guy who hosts Free Thinking on Radio 3? I get so confused. Some BBC ninny said we were promoting a conspiracy theory from the 70s. Actually, no. The Great Reset was launched. You don't have to be a conspiracist about it. The Great Reset was launched on camera in 2020. We played the clip by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales on the World Economic Forum website. That's the World Economic Forum. You see that at the top? A golden opportunity. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales on the Great Reset. His Highness also posted it to his own website, a royal website, royal family website. Since then, the Prince has become king, and he's a little more constrained. He was supposed to be giving a big speech at the Eco-Alarmist Jamboree, COP27, but he's been prevailed upon to pull out. There's going to be a lot of that. Rain stopped play, as the cricketers say. Our favourite of His Majesty's Australian subjects joins us now, Alexandra Marshall. Are you going to be missing the King's speech at COP27?
Oh, it's such a shame, Mark, for the King not to be able to speak at his favourite conference. But look, he fancies himself as a down-to-earth environmentalist. That is part of his whole thing. But he's the kind of environmentalist that powers his Aston Martin with white wine and cheese, which I'm not sure is going to be the solution for the working-class Brits who have to pick between their energy bill and their grocery bill. So the problem that Charles has got is that he launched the Great Reset. There's no getting away from the fact that he did that on a royal account. And now people are gently tapping him on the shoulder and saying, there's a difference, mate, between loving the environment and growing some plants in your back garden and maybe talking to them on occasion and falling in line behind a political movement that has gone global. And he is yet to learn the difference between the politics of climate and his love of the environment. Now, all we can hope is that he is naive and misguided and that he will eventually take Liz Truss's advice. The irony there with Liz Truss being involved in the World Economic Forum, but we'll put that to one side for a second. Hopefully he'll take the advice and go back to gardening and stay out of COP27.
Well, I should point out that you are on whatever it is, the Board of Australians for Constitutional Monarchy. You're an Australian monarchist. I'm a Canadian monarchist. And one of the things about constitutional monarchy is that you have to suffer through some bad patches when the roll of the dice means the current king isn't as good as the previous king was. But I wonder, perhaps, if he hasn't made a calculation. He likes the idea of being head of the Commonwealth because you speak without being advised by your UK PM or your Australian PM. You're just speaking as you. He likes the idea of that. And he likes the idea of his son following in his footsteps. And perhaps the reason for that is if you're a conventional constitutional monarch, you appeal to Squaresville guys like me. But if you're a super woke, cutting-edge monarch, it will endear him to his younger subjects, such as your good self. Is that thinking sound?
I take offence at being roped into that category. Thank you very much, Mark. I'm more sensible than that. I'm more of that square that you talked about. No, but whoever's given him advice about the young, he's confused being cheered at a climate conference to the young liking the monarchy because he's an environmentalist. Now, what he's forgotten is that the young are being raised as Marxists, socialists, sometimes communists, whatever. They're all being raised as collectivists to hate the monarchy. So he's not going to get any traction in that young community by falling in line behind the environment. The only people who will support him are the conservatives who dislike the World Economic Forum for obvious reasons, because it wants to tear down capitalism and tear down the monarchy as well, just quietly. So he's literally sleeping in the bed with the people who want to kill him. And the king has to be extremely careful with that, because it's a path to nowhere, and he's upsetting and annoying the very people who want him to succeed.
Yeah, that's actually a very shrewd insight there, Alexandra. The king obviously thinks, though, there are certain things that are beyond politics, and saving the planet is one of them to him. Hasn't he been given a lot of encouragement after the last 3 years, where basically we were told all during the COVID thing that there's one official now, this isn't a political thing, we're now governed by technocrats who look at all this, the science dispassionately, and say this, that and the other. And the king thinks that applies to the climate, and politicians think that applies to the COVID, but there's a lot of it about, isn't there?
Well, I've said it before. I wrote an article on the king launching the Great Reset, that if he wants to be an environmentalist, yeah, sure, true environmentalism is not political. He could go out and plant a forest. He could refocus on taking care of the Crown estates. He could sponsor his own educational benefits and things for children. He can do anything he likes in the environment, so long as it is not connected to the United Nations, to the World Economic Forum, or to any of these other politicized green groups. And he certainly shouldn't stand next to any of the representatives or attend any of their forums. So yes, he can indulge, he can take a film crew to the Amazon and no one would mind, right? That's okay. That's not political. The problem is when he gets up and gives his speeches, he basically copies and pastes the rhetoric straight from the revolutionary writers at the World Economic Forum, and any monarch should be super careful about saying words like revolution, reimagining the economy, and tearing down civilization, which is essentially the subtext of what he has been saying. So he's not embracing environmentalism as a concept. He's hard on the politicized climate change movement, because that's the advice he's been given, and that's the circles that he has moved in as a king, or as a king in waiting. He had nowhere else to go. So he sort of got adopted by the wing of this movement.
That's very good advice you gave there, Alexandra. I know that one of the Queen's, Her late Majesty's very best private secretaries was Australian. I think it would be time for him to get you over and installed in Buckingham Palace. I will pass that on to the courtiers.
I want him to be good. I want him to succeed. That's why we are critical.
No,
because
I know.
We want it to work.
I know you do. That's why Your Majesty, from a couple of impertinent colonial whippersnappers, she's talking a lot of sense, and you should listen to her. Thank you very much, Alexandra. In July 2009, the then Prince of Wales said we only had 96 months to save the planet. Put that in your diary. Very precise, 96 months. That's... oh my goodness, that's July 2017. Too late. It's already happened. 3 months earlier, April 2009, His Royal Highness said the red squirrel would be extinct within 10 years. That would be April 2019. So if I get the cut of his jib, it was supposed to be curtains for man and all his wretched works come the summer of 2017, after which the poor doomed red squirrel would have the best part of 2 years to frolic and gamble in the rubble of our civilization. I don't generally do the world will end in 96 months shtick, but as it happens, I think the world will end in 96 months, because in 96 months it will be October 2030, which is when the UK is committed to banning the sale of vehicles powered by petrol and diesel. Our stats man, Jamie Jenkins, formerly head honcho of health numbers at the Office of National Statistics, is here. Getting rid of the internal combustion engine by 2030, that's doable, that's viable, everyone's committed to it, Jamie.
Well, of course not, Mark. It's absolute nonsense. Obviously, it's talking about the ban of the sale of new cars in 2030. So people who've got kind of their diesel and unleaded cars will still have them on the road, and we still have petrol stations there. But there's a couple of factors here, Mark. That the cost of the electric cars got to come down significantly to make it affordable for people who can't afford the excessive numbers that it costs to buy these cars. But you look at this winter now. Where are we going into in the UK? We've got struggling to generate enough electricity because we've got to use a lot of gas. The cost of all of that is costing us an absolute fortune. So that's just to run the lights now. So where's all this electricity going to come from by 2030 to power all the electric vehicles? That's the first question. Secondary, where's the charging points going to be for a lot of these homes that are kind of terraced houses or high kind of class box, high tower box and things? It's just not going to be there for us, Mark. So I think it's fantasy land, and all Liz Truss needs to come out with. I think people support the move to more greener energy, more greener technology, but these ridiculous kind of targets that have been set, they just need to be more realistic, and then I think the public can buy into them a bit, I think, Mark.
Well, we saw a good example of that just in the last few days in Florida. If you're listening to the radio in your kitchen and you're told that you have to evacuate your town, it's kind of hard to do it if it takes 4 hours for your car to charge. Then you're stuck there and you're going to die in your destroyed house. So there's a reality gap in a lot of this rhetoric, isn't there?
Well, yeah, indeed. The thing is with the kind of the COP26 that we've had and all the previous ones before, Mark, it is having a direct impact on the cost of living crisis. Now, politicians will go on and say it's all about the Ukraine war. That is a factor in some of this. But the thing is, what we've got, Mark, is that countries obviously are signing up at these kind of agreements across these, when they go to COP26, COP27, to come up with cleaner ways of doing the energy kind of across the countries. And what that means is that the global demand for gas has been going up. So more and more countries are competing for the gas. We've had the shock, obviously, with the Ukraine war. That pushes the cost of gas. And what that's done across Europe, we're seeing the huge increases in the cost of gas because countries like India, China are trying to increase the amount of gas that they use. So there's a direct consequence of all of these countries signing up for all of these global targets on the consumer at the end of the day. And, people aren't seeing that kind of directly, but you can't divorce the fact that these climate agreements that are coming up is hitting the consumer, and it disproportionately hits those kind of at the bottom end who consume kind of less carbon, because obviously you look at kind of the rich and wealthy, their private jets, they're flying off across the world, emitting more per person, and it does directly impact kind of the more poorer people who can't afford all the increased costs by the increased demand for things like gas.
Yeah, just to be clear what you're saying here, you're saying that Western do-gooder interventions in the market are actually wrecking the lives of the poorest and most vulnerable.
Well, yes, indeed, Mark, because you only got to look at the data on that, because the cost has gone up dramatically. But the most carbon that's produced by humans generally is those who are more rich, because they can do more and more things, and then energy is going up because of the world demand for gas has been going up and things. So it does disproportionately impact those. I think, bringing it all back, what it all means, Mark, is this kind of big kind of push towards net zero. We're heading to a position now where a lot of consumers have got zero money in the bank because of the cost of living crisis that is a direct cause of some of these policies. Like I say, there's no harm in going for cleaner energy. Everybody would like to see that. But we accelerated so fast. And the irony of all this, Mark, is if the UK kind of got to net zero overnight, so by 2024, you wouldn't even notice it on the world scale, because the likes of India, China, they're increasing the amount of coal-powered fire stations that they've got to generate more electricity. The UK is a little fraction in all of that. So, these COP26, COP27 agreements, when you start bringing it home and the home comes to the roost and to the consumer, it does have a massive impact.
Thank you very much, Jamie. It's always a pleasure. When we come back, Naomi Wolf is here on the Western World's Cratering Fertility. Also, Stump the Steyn Looms, GB Views at gbnews.uk. You can ask me anything. We're coming right back.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Dr. Naomi Wolf is the author of The Bodies of Others, The New Authoritarians, COVID-19 and the War Against the Human. She was generally regarded as a lefty feminist in good standing until she started talking about the COVID regime. Last night she said many things that got the hysterics on Twitter and the like riled up. For example, quote, "This is why I believe these are bioweapons, because they are literally sterilizing people." I think I've been told by management that I'm supposed to explain at this point that that is not necessarily a universally held view, least of all by His Majesty's government. So if you want the other side of the story, here's ITV's top-rated show this morning with the queue jumpers.
Well, what's really excellent is, and it's a statistic that I think should be shouted from the rooftops, is that after 12 days from the first vaccination of the AstraZeneca vaccine, you are 100% effective against hospitalisation and death. So, you know, those are the statistics we need to be hearing. And yes,
why haven't we heard that before?
Why haven't we heard that before altogether now? Because it's total crap. But that's the other side of the story. You're 100% protected. New study just out. These studies are coming every day now. Being triple vaccinated with the Moderna shot increases your risk of the COVID by up to 27%. You don't say. If Dr. Sarah Kayat is really a doctor, she should have known she was in no position to give the guarantee that she gave. Whereas Naomi Wolf's observation on, quote, literally sterilising people has significant support in the fertility statistics 9 months after we began jabbing women of childbearing age. Birth rates in Switzerland down 9%, Finland down 11%, Germany and Greece down 12%. Here's the Swiss table. Look at this, because this is 2016. You see there on the left of your screen, 2016, 2017, 2018, all pretty much the same with the same seasonal variations. And there's 2022. too. So there's certainly more circumstantial evidence for what Naomi was saying than for what Dr. Kayat was telling the queue jumpers. Let's explore this a little more. It's I mean, that's really the core of biological identity, is whether your species can reproduce.
Right.
And this thing has had a serious effect on that.
Certainly. And, you know, there are investigations to be done about exactly what's causing these dramatic drops in birth rates around the world. And by the way, the Substacker Igor Chudov has looked at government databases around the world and found up to a 20% drop in birth rates. So something's happening. I mean, I was particularly moved. I used to live in Scotland, and I've been contacted by moms in Scotland who want to know more about why there is a doubling of neonatal deaths in Scotland. I mentioned in Ontario, a doctor said there are 86 babies, neonatal deaths in 3 months when they usually have 5 or 6. And a hospital in Haifa has a 34% higher spontaneous abortion miscarriage rate for vaccinated versus unvaccinated moms. So I just want to stress to the commentators on Twitter, where I can't defend myself because I was ejected from Twitter for raising the accurate issue of menstrual dysregulation over a year ago. I just want to say that this is not my opinion. The assertion I made that these mRNA injections are damaging men's and women's fertility comes from now over 40 reports produced by this project of 3,500 medical and scientific experts, physicians, biostatisticians, medical fraud investigators, research scientists who are reading through the Pfizer documents. And the harms are in the Pfizer documents. These are primary sources. These are internal documents. And I can tell you some of the culprits that have emerged. I mean, one of them is 8th grade biology. Please, everyone, you can't be fully fertile if your menstrual cycle is dysregulated.
No.
You just can't.
No.
So that's number one. Number two, Dr. Robert Chandler, who's a respected peer reviewer, sports medicine physician who's treated the Angels and the Lakers, he did a study based on the Pfizer documents that showed that the lipid nanoparticles and the other materials leave the injection site, even though we were told they don't, and they accumulate in the ovaries. And so they're accumulating and accumulating, but we don't see any mechanism of them leaving the body. And as Dr. Jim Thorpe, a fetal maternal medicine specialist, warned, we don't know if those eggs are surviving. Then
well, just let me pick up on that, because you and I have disagreed on abortion over the last couple of years with one thing or another. But I remember being at a whatever it was, a Republican convention in Philadelphia, I think, and there was a demonstration outside where they were chanting, "Keep your rosaries off my ovaries," i.e., you social conservatives, stay the hell out of my ovaries.
Right.
Well, now all those people, the right to keep your ovaries as you want to keep them, don't seem to be in the least bit interested in what these vaccines are doing.
I mean, Mark, are you asking me for logic right now from the left? I mean, I've been on the left my whole career, and right now I am like ideologically homeless because there's no one on the left speaking up for the rights of girls to grow up to be fertile women, the right to have a baby, the right to nurse your baby without harming your baby with polyethylene glycol in your breast milk. You know, even I believe since I was 15 years old in my body, my choice. And now the left has completely abandoned the idea of medical autonomy or physical autonomy or self-determination. So I don't have an answer for you about where are the feminists who should be speaking up for the right of women to not be harmed.
Well, let me ask you another point on that, Naomi, because the term anti-vaxxer is thrown around a lot. I don't actually think these COVID things are vaccines. They don't perform. They don't have despite what Sarah Kayat was saying on that ridiculous television clip, which ought to disqualify her from ever being invited on again, they don't behave as vaccines do. And in fact, we just saw a study early this week that shows that in newborn infants who've come along since the COVID, that the presence of the mRNA actually weakens the effectiveness of the measles, the mumps, the whooping cough vaccines inside. So all the regular kid vaccines are being rendered ineffective by the mRNA coursing around through the kiddie bodies.
Yeah, I haven't seen that study yet, but it is true. There's a lot of truth to what you said, that they're not vaccines. They don't act like any traditional vaccine. I mean, something stunning about the Pfizer documents is that a month into rollout in November 2020, Pfizer knew and the FDA knew that they didn't work. One of the top side effects was COVID. But they work, and this is why I can, again, back up my statement from yesterday that I believe this is a bioweapon. They do work to, these lipid nanoparticles traverse every membrane in the human body, and that includes traversing the placenta, as I mentioned, but it also includes traversing the testes. So little boys, baby boys, as we discussed, are the cells that create adult masculinity are being damaged. So, there's a 360-degree attack on fertility, on reproduction. We're already seeing the results. It's not rocket science. If you dysregulate, women's menstrual cycle, you're going to have fertility problems. But all of these other effects also are creating fertility problems. So, the last thing I'll say, which is really significant, is that China is central now to the manufacture of these mRNA injections. And there was a 100% tech transfer of the BioNTech IP to China, according to the SEC filing. And just since I was last on your show, yesterday I found that another Chinese company actually in Shanghai actually bought part of Pfizer and has opened what is now the third manufacturing plant for these injections in the United States. So, and the last thing I want to tell your audience is Western Europe is vastly disproportionately represented in the Pfizer document adverse events and the United States. So it's not equal around the world. It's disproportionately harming North America first, United States first, then Western Europe, in order of political importance. So you can put these piece of evidence together however you think best, but to me, as a former political consultant to a vice presidential campaign and a presidential campaign, I look at things geopolitically, and there is no way to avoid the question of, is this a national security breach of the West?
And by the way, those were Democrat candidates. Naomi has advised Al Gore and Bill Clinton, all Democrats, but at a certain point that doesn't matter, because what's going on is so weird that it's beyond left and right, as she just pointed out. China gives you the virus, then China opens the plants that cure you of the virus. Odd. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Naomi. We're going to stay on this even if no one else does. Dan Wooden is here. What do you got, Dan?
Yes, you stay on it, Mark. I love it. Very interesting chat. And actually, on that note, Matt Ridley is going to be here, because it is just astonishing, isn't it, Mark, that they care so much about COVID, the establishment, they don't give a damn about the origins of COVID. So he's going to be continuing his search. We all know it came from a lab in Wuhan, don't we? But the question is, why do they not care about it? And following on from your brilliant interview last night, Rod Liddell is here on what the hell is this hunt over Farrow really about, and he's furious about it, Mark.
Yeah. OK, and make sure you ask Viscount Ridley this. What does he think of Peter Daszak, the guy who's all in league with the Wuhan lab, getting a brand new grant from the United States government for more bat research? The guy who bears a large part of the responsibility for the cover-up on the origins. That's all with Dan. Best late night show on telly, and it is starting right after the weather. Stay safe, stay free.
Evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Still breezy tomorrow, but not quite as windy as today. Many places seeing sunny spells. For some, though, there will be a fair few showers. We've seen quite a bit of rain from this weather front today, zipping away from the southeast. Plenty of isobars still on the chart, hence why it'll still be fairly windy through the night, and indeed for much of tomorrow as weather fronts approach from the northwest. Lots of showers around this evening across northern England, North Wales, but they should tend to fade. We'll always keep some outbreaks of rain going across western Scotland and particularly the north of Northern Ireland, but For much of England and Wales, dry and clear and quite a bit colder than last night. It was a cold front that moved through, hence why temperatures will be dropping down into single figures. So a fresher start on Thursday, but a beautifully sunny start for a good part of England and Wales. Quite a bit of cloud coming into Wales, northwest England with some outbreaks of rain, and we'll always see showers coming into western Scotland and across Northern Ireland, particularly here during the afternoon. Not many showers